Thank you, Amila, and thank you for the college as well for inviting me to give this talk. Actually, I was quite interested when you asked me to give this talk because I've never done something like this before. However, when I told my wife, she was shocked and she said, "What are you going to talk about?" Because unlike cardiology, endocrinology, and neurology, we have very little interaction with hematologists except to get a blood picture done occasionally. And that also, by the time the report comes, we've dealt with the patient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just present two cases and I'm going to go and sit there. Right, so basically, this is a 59-year-old woman who had a sudden onset double vision, and the daughter came and said that her right eye stopped moving. She had no headache, vomiting, fever. She had been on thyroxine for a few years, but other than for that, she was very well with no infections. And seeing an ophthalmologist, she was told that she had a right lateral rectus palsy. Her blood pressure was high, which was previously unknown, and she was started on antihypertensives, aspirin, and an MRI scan of the brain and orbit were ordered. So the MRI scan showed that there was a superior ophthalmic vein thrombosis with a little bit of proptosis of that eye. So the patient went back to the neurologist who had seen the patient earlier, and all the infective causes were excluded, and the aspirin, which was started by the neurologist, was omitted and was started on apixaban 2.5 milligrams BD. Apixaban, as you know, is a novel anti-10A inhibitor, something like warfarin, and 2.5 milligrams is the preventive dose or prophylactic dose, and she was also started on steroids. So the patient got better symptomatically within a few weeks, and then after about 3 months, the patient had stopped the anticoagulation and the steroids, and then went back to see the neurologist after some time, and the neurologist, referred the patient for two reasons. One is, should this patient be investigated for a thrombophilic condition? And secondly, should the patient continue on anticoagulation? What do you all think? Because once I saw this patient, I sort of read up about it a little bit, and I came to know that superior ophthalmic vein thrombosis is a rare condition which can cause vision threatening and life-threatening complication, and there are many underlying etiologies. It could be infections, inflammatory conditions, tumors, neoplasms, and hypercoagulable states. And the presenting signs are caused by venous congestion, and the patient can present with painful proptosis, eyelid swelling, ptosis, impairment in motility, and vision loss. And lateral rectus palsy was not something which was commonly described in this type of superior ophthalmic vein thrombosis. So if you look at the question is, do we need to look for thrombophilic conditions in this patient? And what is reported is that if the patient is not having any septic causes, then of course there are immune and hematological causes like antiphospholipid syndrome, which could cause this thrombosis. And therefore, there is some indication that this patient should be investigated for a thrombophilic cause. So the management about anticoagulation, the utility of anticoagulation, we are told, in isolated SOVT has not yet been established because there are so few cases. And anticoagulation to prevent thrombosis extension to the cavernous sinus is something which can be thought of, because we know that if there is cavernous sinus thrombosis, the whole scenario changes for the patient. or if the patient already has some degree of cavernous sinus thrombosis, then again anticoagulation is required. What the anticoagulant should be is again a problem. Our patient got a low dose of, or a prophylactic dose of, an oral anticoagulant, but a lot of the cases have been treated with unfractionated heparin. Steroids again, systemic steroids again is controversial, and if the etiology is non-infective, then orbital inflammatory syndrome can be probably controlled or reduced with the use of steroids, and also it could relieve orbital congestion and reduce proptosis. So this is also a review which I found of about 56 cases of superior orbital vein thrombosis. And if you look at the etiologies, about 38% of them had been septic and about 62 aseptic. And with long-term follow-up, about 74% made a complete recovery. 6 patients lost their vision in the affected eye, and 2 patients, they say, suffered permanent abducens nerve palsy, which was there in our patient, and a patient died. And in this cohort of patients, regardless of the etiology, whether it be infective or non-infective, there didn't seem to be a significant benefit of either corticosteroids or anticoagulation. However, we must remember that if we want to or think of preventing the progression of thrombosis, it might not be a bad idea, if there are no contraindications, to use some sort of an anticoagulation in this sort of patient. So the take-home message here would be, if there's no septic cause, look for immunological neoplastic causes. So maybe in a patient like this, you would wish to refer for further investigations, and then consider anticoagulation plus or minus systemic steroids if there is no contraindication. Now, in contrast to the superior ophthalmic vein thrombosis, what about retinal vein occlusions? We used to get quite a few referrals from ophthalmologists with patients who develop retinal vein occlusions, especially in those who were in the young age group. But your Royal College has put out a guideline, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with, in 2022, which says that following meta-analysis and looking at the data, there doesn't seem to be a change or a difference in the prevalence in patients with or without thrombophilia. So healthy subjects and those with the thrombophilia developing retinal vein thrombosis or occlusion. So therefore, what the British Committee of Standards in Hematology and some of the other recommendations, even by the Royal College of Ophthalmologists, is that thrombophilias are not of primary importance in the pathogenesis of retinal vein occlusion, and therefore does not recommend routine thrombophilia testing for either inherited or acquired causes of isolated retinal vein occlusion. So one thing that we must take note of is, in this guideline as well, is the reference to antiphospholipid syndrome. And I'm sure all of you are aware that antiphospholipid syndrome is an autoimmune condition which can be very, very prothrombotic, more than even some of the inherited thrombophilic conditions. And it causes arterial, or it can cause arterial, venous, or small vessel thrombosis. And up to about last year, retinal vein thrombosis or retinal artery thrombosis or occlusion was not specifically considered as an event, a thrombotic event in antiphospholipid syndrome. So there was that's why a lot of these recommendations and guidelines say that looking for an acquired thrombophilia is not essential. However, last year, the ACR-EULAR antiphospholipid syndrome classification criteria, which has made a lot of us take note of this, and it has made things very much easier for us to define who should be investigated for thrombosis and for antiphospholipid syndrome and what the test should be, mentions, I'm not sure whether it's clear to you, it specifically mentions both retinal vein thrombosis stroke occlusion and retinal artery thrombosis in these domains. So there are clinical domains which have been listed out now. Those days, APS was any arterial, venous, or small vessel thrombosis. But here, there are domains, macrovascular, microvascular, and so on, with a certain weightage given for which domain the thrombosis occurs in. Likewise, the investigations, also the laboratory tests, there are certain domains which tell us this test is better or is more relevant than the other test. So now we need to sort of consider whether these patients with retinal vein thrombosis or arterial thrombosis need to have a thrombophilic screen done. So what about treatment? Well, there's no high-quality evidence to support the use of anticoagulation or antiplatelet drugs in retinal vein thrombosis, and it doesn't really matter if there is a thrombotic tendency or not. So there is no indication to start anticoagulation or antiplatelets in patients with RVO. So the take-home message in this is that if you see a patient with a retinal vein thrombosis, we know that the common causes are things like like blood pressure, hypertension, diabetes, and all that. But there are the myeloproliferative disorders which are rare, and then causes of hyperviscosity like myelomas and paraproteinemias. So if you just order a full blood count and ESR in everyone, and if the full blood count is abnormal, maybe follow it up with a blood picture, which the report you might not get. Unless the patient is young or less than 50 years of age, and there's bilateral involvement with retinal vein obstruction, thrombosis, or if there's a very strong past history of thrombosis or a family history of thrombosis, it is only in this group of patients that you will need to consider thrombophilia screening, especially the antiphospholipid syndrome, and there's no good evidence for the antithrombotics in retinal vein occlusion. Right, so this is a second patient is a 38-year-old man who presented about 6 years ago with a corneal opacity. I hope you can see that, yeah. He had no history of trauma, no history of infection, and he's otherwise very well. Any possible causes for this? Right, so this patient was actually Kusum's patient, and this is what the eye looked like before he did a DALC, and you can see what it was like after the DALC. I'm not going to tell you what DALC is because I don't know what it is. Kushi told me, but I just can't remember what those 4 letters are, but I'm sure you know. And then this is what happened 3 months after the DALC. Okay, so this is what happened before. This was immediately after the DALC, and that's what happened 3 months after the DALC. And you can see that it has come back again. Okay, so at this point, Kusum referred this patient to me to exclude a crystalline keratopathy, whatever that means. So basically, he had sent this whatever he extracted from the eye for histology, and the histology came back as saying inflammatory tissue. So what we did was we worked him up to see whether there was some sort of a abnormal protein getting deposited in the eye. And as you can see, this immunofixation, he did have abnormal immunoglobulin or paraprotein in his serum. And when you have an abnormal paraprotein in serum, the first thing that you want to do is to exclude something like multiple myeloma. And multiple myeloma is derived from or comes out from malignant plasma cells. And if there is no multiple myeloma, then the next thing is that there is someone with a paraprotein, there is no organ or tissue injury, and therefore we would refer to that as MGUS or monoclonal gammopathy of undetermined significance. And with age, people can have a little paraprotein like this. But then with time, people found that even if they don't have myeloma, patients don't have myeloma, these paraproteins can go and get deposited in various organs and cause isolated tissue damage and injury. And that was referred to as monoclonal gammopathy of clinical significance. And actually, before that, we now talk about something called monoclonal gammopathy of renal significance as well. And then I didn't know what to do, so I emailed this lady, Angela Dispenzieri, who's an expert in this from the Mayo Clinic. And she said, if you are sure that this is a monoclonal gammopathy, remember the histology did not show anything. He said, you need to go and treat this patient as for myeloma. So basically, we treated the patient as for a myeloma. The only problem he has was the corneal opacities, nothing else. So we gave him 4 cycles of chemotherapy, which is VCD. The monoclonal band disappeared. And this is what happened after about a year, after which Kusum did a repeat DALC. So if you look at these abnormal or the monoclonal gammopathies of clinical significance, you can see there are a whole list of those on this axis, and you can see the tissues being involved in the other axis. And you can see that most of these conditions will involve more than one tissue or organ, except for crystalline keratopathy, which is found only in the eye. And you can also see on the 2 red columns there, the diagnosis or the contribution of the diagnosis by the clinician and the pathologist. And you can see that in the crystalline keratopathy, that the clinician, it is important for the clinician, or the clinician is the one who first detects this or thinks of this. So I think it's very important to remember this, because if you see a photograph like what I showed you, it might be important for you to think about this sort of a diagnosis. And it has progressed so much from MGUS to MGRS to MGCS, and today there's an entity called MGOS, or monoclonal gammopathy of ocular significance. So basically, the newer studies have shown that if a patient is diagnosed with an ocular MGOS, it is always better to treat the patient, give chemotherapy, get rid of the paraprotein, which will go and get deposited in the eye, and thereafter do the DALC or the PKP or whatever it is, because that is going to prolong the benefit or the efficacy of your surgery. Okay, so the take-home message is rule out everything else, but don't forget this. Thank you very much.